in the year to actually handle it now. We've actually got wineries approaching us to do it, and I'm reluctant to overplay the hand on it, and so we'll just keep doing the wine.
What's the cost of as in for the consumer for getting
what to come to this? Well, it's partially sponsored by Kelvin, and then we factor it in at a wholesale cost plus courier, decanting, which has to be under a health and safety license. What else? Glass jars, which we then recycle because we hug the trees these days and credit people back on them. So the basic entry cost is just a bit under $30 before you look at the cost of the wine. It's rough and dirty what it comes to. The Italians, I guess they're so used to all that lovely EU marketing money that they really don't mind throwing huge volumes of wine at us, which is terrific because we don't take a margin on it. We just put it through at whatever the cost to us is to manage it, because the back end is great. So that's really our primary interest.
So for tonight's tasting, how much did it cost
tonight's
the consumer?
Tasting was, Jesus, Kelvin, 65, 70, something like that.
Yeah. Cool.
65 delivered.
65 delivered. Oh, that's the other thing. We give a $15 discount if people collect the boxes. So that's kind of cool. I get a chance to talk to them and meet them, and we're finding that the average household, we have about 2 point something people per tasting kit. Because it's a fair amount of wine. Even the Australians get a bit daunted by the by the volume. And then, so basically, like tonight, for example, we have 36 kits delivered. So we're looking at about 60 people that will look at this. And then we're finding that the recordings on YouTube and what have you are really strong. We get really good hits on an ongoing basis with it as well. So all in all, we're pretty jazzed about it.
Cool.
Hey, Mr. Nordstrom, you're not looking that jet lagged anymore.
I've had a week. I have had a week in my hotel to recover, so jet lag is over. Now it's just boredom is setting in. This is a welcome departure from my day.
Have they said anything to you about reducing your 21 days, or are you going to have to do the whole story?
No, I sent an email to the MOH as soon as I got here saying, I live by myself, I'm vaccinated, and they sent me a form letter back that says, do your part for Singapore.
Well, that's putting it candidly.
So, no, I'll be here for 21 days.
Okay. Well, we'll send you some more care parcels as and when you need them.
Okay.
Do you have to do 21 days hotel quarantine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God,
and Dave really timed it badly because he went to the East Coast for a wedding, and I think if he'd come back a week earlier, he would just have to do the 14, right?
No, because that's the bad thing is even if you were only had one more day of your 14, when they announced it, you now had to do 7 more. So it was
wow.
Yeah. So I found out before I went into quarantine. Some people were in quarantine or ready to get out, and they said no, 7 more days.
The thing that would terrify me is I'd ration my undies to get it to the last day, and then the idea of having to deal with it for another 7 days, so I'm all over.
I would have been on the phone to you, Robert. I need help. Send more.
I've got a mate situation who flew down from Thailand for a horse race in Singapore. That's on tomorrow, but he's caught in that situation, so he's locked in for another 7 days. But he flew down, did a 14-day quarantine for the horse race, and got stitched up.
Oh, no.
It's horrendous.
Hopefully likes hotels.
Yeah. Anyway, such is life. You guys are obviously doing it good in WA.
Yeah, we had our own little lockdown again.
Mini hiccup. I mean, geez, this gave you a long weekend or something, wasn't it? It's like
it was.
Well, that's twice now where we've locked down for one or two cases. So, well, all the restrictions have been lifted again. But I mean,
it didn't really have much of an impact on us down here. On this occasion, we weren't included in the lockdown.
But surely tourism, I mean, international tourism aside, are you getting folks from Perth and what have you coming down?
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah.
Really?
We're seeing the region's never been so busy. And people's willingness to spend has been crazy as well. So we're seeing I think most of Australia is seeing a similar trend with domestic expenditure being quite high.
I was sitting in a restaurant last night, and it was quite a nice place, and just counting the turnover of people in because you can only eat between sort of 6:30 and 10 o'clock, and then you can't have anything on your table.
Mm-hmm.
And they were working them. I always thought that the Americans were good at turning tables, but in Singapore, people have got really good at extracting the last dollar out of their restaurant tables. It was very impressive. The moment someone starts yawning and the bill's on the table,
right, you're out of there. Yeah.
You're not eating anymore. Get out.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely done.
Yeah.
Hey, then, did everything arrive in the end?
All good, Rob. Thank you. Got it.
Very good.
Got it in time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a day. It's time to drink. 7 o'clock. All right, I'd like to welcome Alex and Hugh from Mosswood to introduce us to the new releases. I always get a sense of anxiety when the wineries tell me there's absolutely none left. And having had the success of last year's vintages, we're already facing what we have tonight available on the site as the end of the news for the Cabernet and the Semillon. I was just saying to Hugh and Alex that it's extraordinary to actually just put up an invite and see stock selling straight away just before the event even starts. So it's a new benchmark that I'll remind all the other winemakers they need to attain from now on. So maybe, guys, you could just talk to us about 19 and 20, because I understand they're fairly different vintages. Maybe you want to just talk in a broad macro sense, and then we'll get into the two whites after that.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'll lead us off just with a brief introduction on Mosswood, and then I'll let Alex go into the.
I can go into the
vintages. So
after that,
I assume that most of you are fairly familiar with Mosswood, but let's just start with a brief history. So Mosswood was the second vineyard planted in Margaret River, and that was in 1969 by Bill and Sandra Pannell, and they have Picardy now in Pemberton. They planted the vineyard, and that the initial or the early plantings were Pinot Noir, Semillon, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and by 1979 they needed a winemaker, and my father Keith graduated from Roseworthy College in Adelaide and took on the job here at Mosswood, and by 1983, he and Mum leased the business and the property, and then purchased it in 85. So it's been in the family since then. And then in 2000, we purchased the Ribbonvale vineyard, which is about 2 kilometres south of Mosswood. So two of the wines that we'll look at tonight come from Ribbonvale, and so we'll do a deeper dive into the story behind that property when we get there. But I guess that's a brief history of Mosswood. So I'll pass over to Alex to talk about the 19 and 20 vintages.
Yeah. So I guess, well, tonight, guys, we're lucky we've got a pretty good cross section of 4 different vintages. Obviously we'll delve into the 17s and the 18s when we get further into the reds, but I suppose more specifically with the 19 and 20, very different vintages. 19's one of the coolest ones we've got on record over here. So cool spring, wet spring, and that sort of carried through all the way through to summer. We barely even got a summer over here, which led all the ripening to be pushed further back. So definitely freshness, lots of acidity, very vibrant fruit notes in all of the wines. But 2020 was, I guess, probably what we'd call a textbook vintage. We had a beautiful spring. I guess the only downside with 2020 was the yields. So obviously, flowering was affected, but probably also a product of the conditions in 19 with bunch formation. So crops were down in 2020, unfortunately. So I guess with 19 we also had very bad bird pressure. We had frost at the beginning of the growing season, which affected Chardonnay yields. So yeah, 19 was a very challenging one. 2020 was, I guess, ideal aside from the yields. So in the 2020 Semillon, I guess with the first, or I guess the first one we've got in our glass, at least, it's a very ripe style. So
guys, just to jump in, our Semillon is number 2 of your jars, and the Elsa, the Sauv is number 1.
So you've got Sav number 1.
Yeah, Sav 19 is number 1.
Yeah, okay.
If you can click with that, that'd be good.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess going back to vintage 19, cooler, fresher year. The Elsa's a different take on what was traditionally a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon off the Ribbonvale property. So it's a much more complex style. It's a brand new wine from Mugford, actually. New label, all of that sort of thing. Made somewhat in a Fume cross Sancerre style, I guess, with a bit of malolactic influence as well. So it's very different from your traditional New Zealand Sauv Blancs, your traditional Australian Sauv Blancs.
I think the money shot on it, just tasting it for the first time tonight, is that the lacy acidics are just beautiful. They're just very clear, but also incredibly gentle. I really love that component to it. And also very linear and direct, right? It's got a point of view, and it makes it straight off the cuff without any of, not to denigrate other Sauvignon Blancs, but so many others tend to fall upon themselves with tropical fruits. But this has got so much more to say as a point of view.
Yeah, exactly. And we would often pick our Sauvignon Blanc component quite grassy, which is fairly typical of Margaret River. You've got grassy and tropical notes. We went on the riper side with the harvest. So trying to capture a bit more of that riper guava fruit notes, but then in the background, you've got all this oak influence, Malo influence, Lee's contact, all that sort of thing to sort of just, I guess, complexify is not a word, but
I like it.
But it does do that to that variety.
Yeah, it's got a weight about it that's really gorgeous. And in New Zealand, for example, not to give our Kiwi neighbours too much of a hard time, but
we can do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
There's a huge movement into barrel ferment, which is all well and good, but it's got to be judiciously approached. Otherwise, it just becomes again just almost a Chardonnay, God forbid. So it's what's great about this is a deep understanding of the fruit and how much oak's needed in order for it to kind of balance itself out. And it does that really beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll shift now to the 20 Semillon and just give a brief note on the winemaking process there. So unlike the Elsa, I've got actually around the wrong order on my table. Unlike the Elsa, there's no oak influence in the Semillon. So basically what we're trying to achieve with the Semillon is a pure expression of the fruit and the vineyard. And so we feel that the wine doesn't need the body associated with oak, and so therefore we can achieve a full-bodied style without that. So Semillon was part of the early planting at Mugford. We have played around a little bit with the style over the years, but I think at least the last few decades has been fairly refined. We in the vineyard, like all of the varieties, hand-picked and then comes into the winery and hand-sorted. So there's nothing other than grapes that are going into the press. It's then a whole bunch pressed into stainless steel tank, fermentation completed in stainless steel tank, and that's basically it. It's a very simple process, but one that should, I guess, make the fruit itself the hero of the wine. And I guess it's an expression of the site. So no one else can grow Semillon on that patch of dirt, and so therefore nothing can taste the way that does.
Like it does, yeah. I think for me tonight, maybe rock melon, green melon, sort of green fruit component, which is jumping for me, and some honeysuckle, beautiful, and I'm sure that honeyed component will evolve over time. I mean, the acids are glorious, so it has plenty of time to rock and roll in the cellar. And I just know where this is heading. It's going to be fantastic in years to come. I guess it's a rough vintage for you guys. What are you, 20 points down on production? Was it more in terms of actual output?
For the 2020, Sam?
20, yeah.
Not quite as bad as 2019 because we didn't have the bird pressure.
Okay.
But yeah, yields still low.
Yeah.
Kelvin was asking just before about the comparison with the 19, and I think it was the 19 that we tasted with you last year.
Yes.
And so we're explaining that the 2020 is certainly riper. We left it a little bit longer to achieve the flavor ripeness, and so what that's led to is obviously a higher alcohol, but also maybe a bit more body in the final wine. I think we prefer to err on the side of maybe slightly riper in terms of alcohol, and ensure that we achieve those the flavor ripeness rather than picking towards a certain percentage of alcohol.
I guess that the way you guys are treating the Semillon is primarily different from the New South Wales approach, which is involving oak, whereas here you guys are just going for a pure fruit expression in steel and giving a complete, aside from the terroir for a second, the final result is a totally different interpretation of the grape.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And I guess with Hunter, I mean, we always talk about this a lot with consumers because we get asked it a lot. What's the difference between you guys and Hunter? And they also pick a lot greener, a lot earlier. So they've got a lot more acid. I guess as a style, the Mosswood in particular is much more approachable when young. It's got that roundness that Hugh was talking about.
Yeah.
And trying to drive it away from the grassy characters, much more into the, the fig and the honeysuckle that you were talking about, the sherbet and that quince paste sort of.
Delicious acids, hey, yowza. I'm just thinking because I'm a big fan of say the Lovedale out of Hunter, and it doesn't get, even with an extended cellar release, it's not nearly as approachable. It's years and years behind in terms of approachability, whereas this is actually ready to be opened. It's a fundamental difference in approachability at an early stage for me.
We're absolutely looking for that balance, but we make this wine to be approachable young, but then also really reward aging as well. So with 10 years of age, you start to get those secondary characters, and so you get more of that sort of tinned apricot sort of character, and then also you get a greater viscosity on the palate too. So it's really and lanolin as well.
Yeah, waxy lanolin. Yeah.
Somebody brought out a 96 from you guys a couple of months ago at a brown bag dinner, and it was apricot in color as well as flavor. Jeez,
right.
God, someone's serving a sauterne halfway, first half of the meal. What the hell's going on? But the flavor was fantastic, and it was definitely holding together. But it had this incredible generosity of spirit at that stage in its life. It was ticking the boxes in terms of structure, but had definitely evolved into something really amazing over time. So, needless to say, I think we finished the Semillon before the food. Which is
out of the brown bags, was it?
I live for the brown bags. I'm probably the worst person at it. I call Bosnia instead of France. I'm a complete cluster. But it's something that we do quite a lot of here in Singapore. It's great fun to bring.
Definitely.
Awesome. That's good to
I'm
hear.
also horrendous at it. So
mine always come in socks instead of paper bags.
Okay, shall we move to the reds?
Yes.
Do you want to look? I guess we can look at them one by one because they are different vintages and different points of view. So maybe the Pinot first.
Yeah, let's go Pinot first. I'll just get myself
17 Pinot.
Here.
So that's our number 3.
Number 3 glass. Yep. Yeah. So 17 as a vintage, again, quite cool. Not as cool as 19, but getting there. So yeah, quite a long, drawn out growing season, longer ripening as well. So the vines, the fruit sort of had to sit on the vines for an extended period of time. I think we picked anything until early March in 17, and this was the first one off that vintage. So was quite a wet spring. Not a particularly so. Keith's just walked into the room.
Yeah. He's in his gym gear.
Yeah.
He's really relaxed.
We just got distracted.
Let's go back to the wine.
Back to the wine.
We see all kinds of things on these videos. I'm telling you.
He's got me off my wine, that's for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, the wines themselves, very vibrant, very pretty. And yeah, I mean, we definitely had to work, I think, to get, and this is probably going to be more appropriate when we get into the Cabernets, had to work a lot to get that ripeness. I mean, Pinot is one of the earlier varieties to come off over here. So generally we don't have any problems getting that variety ripe.
Yeah.
But I guess the length of time on the vines probably helped it.
Yeah, it's the color betrays the phenolics, because the color of the wine is actually really quite light, just looking at it tonight. But the phenolics are giving me a beautiful waxy lanolin kind of nuance, which I think is just beautiful. But what I wanted to ask you was the flavor construct in the mid palate, is that going to broaden over time? Will that fatten out? Because it's sitting quite lightly tonight for me.
Oh, it'll definitely broaden out. Yeah. I mean, it is a wine that does age very well. You know, and when we say that, it's not 10 to 12 years, it's 20 to 30 years, particularly with now that we're all screw capped. So, I think probably after that 5-year mark, you'll start to see that definitely broaden out and evolve. And then as it hits that 10-year mark, it'll start to develop those, those beautiful Pinot aged bottle character that everyone loves. So
I guess that the nose for me is so nuanced. It's just very seamless and soft and really beautifully approachable at this stage.
Absolutely. And it has some nice sort of almost spicy notes in the background.
Yeah.
Cooler vintage. The two different clones, I think, play a part in that as well. So the D4 and the D5 clones, the two Dijon clones.
I'm thinking
one of them is very spicy in character, and then one of them is more of your sort of red fruits, or darker fruits, I should say.
I think your question or your comment there about approachability, that there's been a question pop up about oak regime, and I think they sort of work hand in hand. So, like with all of our red wines in particular, we don't. So the Pinot has about 20% new oak in the barrel mix. And that it stays in those barrels for 18 months, and we bottle it off into bottle, and then it sits in bottle for a year before we release it. So where the oak regime, I guess, lends itself to approachability at a younger age. So you've got greater integration between the oak and the fruit, which means that it's balanced on release, and I think that's part of it.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Another question here that I've just seen pop up about vine age, vine age in the Pinot. So part of the early planting at Mosswood, so 73. So where are they at now? Then coming up to 50 years old.
Yeah.
They don't appear to be slowing down in terms of yields. It's not like what we're seeing in Cabernet and Chardonnay, where the vine age is really impacting on yields. Pinot seems to be going pretty solidly.
See, I mean, the D5 clone especially seems to yield very well still. So certain sections definitely on the decline, but
do you have expectations of that over time? Does experience in the Margaret River give you an idea of what to expect, or do you have to just approach it by sight in terms of how long those vines are going to go?
What's it? I mean, yeah. Given that they're some of the oldest vines in the regions the region, there's no experience there, and so for us, it's a numbers thing. So Keith is an absolute nerd in terms of following the numbers, and so we can see quite clearly the general trend in yields, and while the yields were across the board were up a little bit this year, we have been seeing a gradual decline in our older vines, and so there's certainly a discussion between all of us at the moment, which is ongoing, about a replant program, because obviously you can't just rip everything out and then wait for it to grow. So so it'll have to be a structured thing whereby we can manage our yield losses to replants over a period of time.
I was talking to some blokes in Clare the other day, and they were saying the same thing, but the derogation of yields is alarming there. They're actually having to really scramble to keep up with what's going on. It was the opinion of one or two of them. So I guess different strokes for different folks. I mean, you guys got a completely different set of climates and conditions in Margaret River, but it's definitely something everyone's well got their eyes on for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Sure.
So now maybe onto the Ribbonvale Merlot. Mate, the one question I wanted to ask you was your home blocks versus Ribbonvale. Is there an altitude difference? Is it any kind of significant difference there?
It would be different, but it's not very much. When I say not very much, you'd be in a 10 to 15 meters difference in altitude. Yeah. So we're only about, I guess it's hard without a map, but we're only about 2 kilometers from the ocean.
Yeah.
So I think our altitude sits at about 100 meters off the top of my head.
All right. So that's pretty much what Stellenbosch enjoys. And I think where you blokes are, you're on the same latitude, or give or take.
Yeah, you're very close. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So we've got the heavily maritime influence, not just we've got the Indian Ocean directly west of us, which is only, as I said, 2 kilometers from us, but also the Southern Ocean at the bottom end of Margaret River. And then we've got Geograph Bay in the north. So we've sort of got 3 points around us. So it gives us that very moderated summers, but also relatively warm winters, I guess, too. So, yeah.
Maybe you guys can walk us through this Merlot now, what you're looking for from it and traveling.
So Merlot, that's all off the Ribbonvale property, 2017. Merlot's a lucky one in the cooler vintages in that it does burst and therefore flower and therefore ripen a bit earlier. Yeah. So generally, we don't have any issues getting that right. The alcohol's up around the 14 mark, so very generous wine. We actually, not dissimilar to the Pinot, very meticulous viticulture involved. A lot of people, I guess, probably downplay Merlot as a variety, unfortunately. And for us, we're the opposite. So we run the Scott Henry Trellis system on it, very labor intensive.
What does that mean?
Go into it.
What's the Scott Henry Trellis?
So the Scott Henry Trellis system is a slightly different take on the traditional VSP, where you've got all your, I'll use my hands to demonstrate probably the best way. Get a little bit silly, but yeah, the normal VSP, all the shoots are positioned up. So vertical shoot positioning. And then whereas the Scott Henry Trellis system, we actually train half the shoots to go like that. So a good way to look. Exactly. A good way to look at it would be like to fold out a solar panel.
Okay.
And allow, the other half of the canopy to get sunlight. And then it exposes your bunches as well. Yeah. So it's a very good technique to drive out herbaceous and green characters within the berry, but also give the leaves of the vines actually much more sun exposure to therefore ripen your fruit. So the downside to it obviously is labor. But we employ that over majority of the red varieties at both vineyards. So it's a lot of attention to be put on in the vineyard for us. So
Mark's asking, is it 100% Merlot? Is there anything else in it?
There's about 4% Cabernet Franc in that as well. Okay. So the Cabernet Franc definitely gives it a little bit of a vibrant lift, but also a bit of tannin as well. And so the Merlot.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, that's okay. No, so we cold soak it in the winery. So after the hand picking and the hand sorting, gets cold soaked for two days. So that's again trying to drive out, or not drive out, but retain as much tannin and depth and flavor compounds from the skins and that sort of thing. So I guess we're trying to emulate that sort of Semillon and Pomerol style. So a bit more of a serious Merlot with structure and tannin and fruit depth as well.
The winning shot for me on it is the very finely detailed tannin. It's this beautiful precision in the tannin that's fantastic. And certainly in the mid palate and the roof of the mouth, it's just it caresses instead of boldly going where no man has gone before.
Yeah, definitely. And we want the tannins to be present, so firm and concentrated. Yeah. But we don't want them to be chalky and leaving your mouth dry, that sort of thing. And I suppose again, probably the Scott Henry Trellis system comes into that a bit too. I think it it helps ripen the tannins within the skins and the seeds as well, because they've just got that more sun exposure. So
that Scott Henry process must be really demanding on labor when it comes to harvest at different angles and what have you.
It actually makes it easier for the pickers because
really?
it sits in a very obvious fruit zone, and it's particularly in years like 2021, where there's not significant leaf growth around the fruit zone. It's actually quite easy for them. Whereas in a vertically stooped position trellis, you've got to sort of push through trying to find your way into the bunches.
Right.
And so it's in that way, it's actually probably easier.
Okay.
And we've just been asked about the difference between upward vine fruit versus ground facing fruit.
Well, I'm sure there is a slight difference. We've
got to be ripeness, right?
Yeah, it would be ripeness related, definitely. I don't think we've ever done a trial.
I never tried it.
To actually pick the downward or the down canopy, if you like, the bottom canopy versus the top canopy.
Don't worry, Colin specializes in curly questions. I think he does.
I guess the space between the top and the bottom would be all of about a foot. So,
okay.
We've got a lot of air movement. We have, the Frio Doctor, as it's called in Western Australia, the afternoon sea breezes. So you got a lot of air movement. So I don't think the difference would be that pronounced. Yeah. It would be an interesting one to do. If he wants to come over and do the trial for us, then he's more than welcome to.
You're cordially invited.
Absolutely. So cellaring potential on this one, significant. So I guess we put it in the same realm as the Ribbonvale Cabernet and Mosswood Cabernet. So optimal drinking on this is 15 to 20 years, and that's when you'll start to see the the bottle bouquet secondary characteristics coming through. Now, as what Alex mentioned, the impact of screw cap, the Stelvin for us, it's exciting. It'll be exciting to see where these wines or how long these wines will last for. Opening the early 2000s under screw cap, they're remarkably fresh.
I did a tasting with, I think I might have mentioned it to you last year, of 96 Mosswood Cab in Cork and Stelvin. And it was a brown bag again. And I can't tell you how dramatically better the Stelvin tasted compared to the Cork bottle. Bought at the same time, same cellar. The bloke had kept it specifically to trial them side by side. And geez, the 96 was just glorious. There was absolutely nothing that one could fault. Whereas with the Cork, all the marks of wear and tear were starting to show, despite the very best attention to cellaring. So definitely the way you guys have gone, the direction you've gone is fantastic.
And that's absolutely been our experience with it, Robert, as well. The variation that you see in wines under cork is just from the same bottling run is just crazy. It being a natural product, you're going to get variation in that product, and over a long period of time, the differences just get amplified. And so for us, it was a no-brainer really to go towards a more consistent product where our wines were showing freshly. And
you guys have much of a library of side-by-side bottlings?
Yeah. So what first vintage of screw cap trials was 2000, and so 2000 Mosswood Cabernet was under screw cap. With cork as well.
And I'm sure the ones we had was late 90s. I'm sure they went in the 2000s. I'll check with Adam. Maybe I have my vintage.
Maybe 2000.
Yeah.
But we do. So we've got a few years there to look at side by side.
If ever you wanted to bring that particular idea to Singapore, we'd be.
Well, my understanding was that Keith and Claire already have actually.
Yeah.
Really?
They did a tasting with some, and Kelvin
would have been there.
Kelvin would have been there.
Okay.
If he's listening and wants to jump in.
Kelvin, where's the love?
This was the Cork versus Screw Cap tasting at Tower Club.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. That's right.
Well, anytime you guys want to redo that, sorry, I'm sidetracking here. I've got a lot of people who'd love to try that.
Keith and Claire were were kind enough we ran both cork and screw cap for about 5 years before we completely switched over.
And you did the blind? You tested?
Not the blind. We supplied demand to both. And, and the initial stage of doing cork and screw cap, nobody wanted screw cap. Then the sudden swing came about. Everybody wanted screw cap. Nobody wanted cork. And we knew it was time.
My understanding was the last bottling, I think, was either 06 or 07 of cork, which went to Singapore. So,
all right. Well, let's have a look at the Cabernet now. Big drum roll. Thank you guys so much for helping us bring this to our customers. The allocation we have on the side at the moment is the last we're going to get for 18. Kelvin's been really generous with us, but I think I'm pushing the love if I ask for any more at this point. And the same goes for the Semillon as well. What we've got up there is the end of the news. So you have just given this 97, and that's quite recently, right? I think it would be a month or so ago.
Yeah. So there's been some the critics have loved this wine so far, but our most important critics are the customers. So briefly on the 18 vintage. So Alex talked about 20 being textbook. Well, I think 18 probably just pips it. Nice even ripening. So there was no rush to pick before the rain with the Cabernet, which is something that we face quite regularly. So what it meant was we were able to leave the fruit out on the vines to ripen comfortably, and it came in fantastic condition. It was then pressed off into barrel and spent just under 3 years in barrel, so quite a long period in barrel. About 18% new oak. So once again, reasonably low percentage of new oak, but I guess in the Mosswood sort of style, we like the oak to be well integrated with the fruit, and so we find that a longer period with a lower percentage of new oak really serves the wine well. Overall, we're really pleased with how this wine is showing at a young age, but I guess the proof will be in the pudding with how it develops.
I love the top notes of the olive tapenade at this stage. Really, I'm showing quite strongly.
Yep.
I think the genius in this is the fusion of oak and fruit. It's just a undulating linear experience. It's just glorious, and again that detailed tannin, just really finely pinprick tannin, just really, really beautiful, and without doubt a long road ahead of it. In fact, I would suggest, I always thought that 17 in Margaret River was seen as a stellar year, but I find this more exciting for me than my memories of 17. I think there's something quite snazzy about it at this early stage. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, there's more, there's a bit more hoo-ha about the 2018 vintage compared to 17. So 17, particularly for Cabernet, we just had to wait and wait and wait. It was just so mild. The wines from 17 were fantastic. They were really elegant in style as a result of that. Yeah. But 18 is it's bright, it's juicy, great fruit intensity, particularly while it's young, and so I guess it currently has the critical acclaim in terms of year-on-year comparisons. But it'll be interesting to see how they age.
In terms of alcohol, it seems a little bit quieter in the alcohol stakes than last year. Just more soft and unctuous for me, anyway, from what I remember of 6 months ago when I looked at the last. So what would it be sitting at? About 14? It wouldn't be much higher than
14 and a half.
And a half. Okay.
Yeah. So it's probably the riper end of the spectrum, I suppose, in that sense. But Jason, not in terms of it handles it for sure.
No fire on it at all.
No, and it still has that. Yeah, you mentioned the olive tapenade note, but and a little bit of tobacco and that sort of character in there. So it's not displaying any of the overripe, jammy notes that you can get in overripe Cabernet. So.
Yeah. Jason's about to open an 05. Thanks, Jason. I guess
well done.
lost.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. that'll be drinking really
good comparison.
Well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. I love that.
Absolutely.
All right. Any more questions before we let the blokes go? No questions. Stunned silence tonight.
Robert, I was interested in your comments about the Merlot, because Alex started talking about it, and we, particularly in the domestic market, we have to really try and position that wine as a straight Merlot, as opposed to what previously Australian Merlots have been seen as sort of easy drinking generic dry red. And blended away with other things.
Mate. Australian Merlot has the worst PR in the world.
Is that something that you see with Australian Merlots in Singapore as well?
Yeah, even in Sing, but we don't see a lot of plain New World Merlot. I would say that the benchmark single varietal Merlots that Lou and I are finding are the Italian Merlots, just absolutely brilliant value for money and quality. In fact, we often bang on about the cost of a Semillon versus the cost of a Tuscan Merlot. There's quite a lot of room to move between the two. The styles are very different. Undoubtedly, well, in a brown bag, I'd get it wrong, but most people would get it right. That there's definitely a different style to the two. But I'm amazed by what they're doing, especially in 16, 15. Haven't tasted much 17 yet, but certainly they're showing really, really well. Mark's asking about the cellaring on the cab. 20?
Well, yeah, I mean it's going to age as long as, I guess, historically it normally does, and that's sort of up to the 30-year mark, and then probably beyond as well. So 10 years you'll start to get the onset of that bottle bouquet, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you get those sort of underlying leathery and tarry notes start to develop, and then the 20-year mark, you get a bit more of that, and then the 30-year mark, a lot more again. So
we had the 85.
The 85 the other night,
last week at the vintage party. And we made sure that was one of the early wines that we drank, because so that it was remembered.
Yeah.
And the ones obviously under cork, and that was looking remarkably fresh. It wasn't the wine of the night though. For me, the 88 Pinot was.
Yeah.
Really? That's brilliant. That's fantastic.
So what's that? So 30 odd years old and still showing remarkably fresh. Not 100% Cabernet has just come up. So 2018, 92% Cabernet, 4% Petit Verdot, 4% Cabernet Franc.
Right. Well, that's
guys, if I could, just getting back to your point about Merlot, the one thing that Rob and I have been dealing with a lot in the past was with the James Irvine, right? So that's always been the benchmark in Singapore, at least for Australian Merlot, at least as it was in the past. Now, in my own personal opinion, that Merlot's taken a journey to the dark side now, so it's really not what it used to be. So the impression of Australian Merlot in general, I think, is that it's an open book. There's not much of it produced. I can't think of many other producers out there apart from yourselves and Irvine. There's Clarendon Hills.
Catnook as well from Kenora.
Clarendon Hills made some outstanding Merlot. I don't know if they're still making it, but I imagine they are.
Especially back in the day. I'm not sure what it's like if they do anymore. But
I mean, the Merlot that we drank, Rob, in the 04 to 06, were just splendid. Absolutely
glorious. Yeah.
But Rob's absolutely right. In the short term, over the last 5 years, we've found that Italian Merlot, some of the better ones, are just knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, it's an interesting sell for us, because we often find that it gets written off by the consumer before they've tasted it, and so it's absolutely a hand sell. If we go and present at a restaurant, or even showing it in the trade, people sort of initially turn their nose up at it, and then they actually taste it and smell it, and they think,
well, dude, I'd say the best way to market it to Australians is to draw those similarities to Semillon, because
absolutely,
from what I'm reading of the domestic market in Oz, people are becoming I'm dating myself. I haven't been in Oz for almost 12 or 13 years now, but from what I'm reading, there's a far more domestic consumption and openness to French wines than there certainly was when I was knocking around in Sydney. And I think that's the way to really pig it.
It'd be a good one for a brown bag night as well. You guys out there, if you want to turn up with a
bring your best game.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
Rob, speaking of Saint-Emilion, I was wondering, Alex and Hugh, have you guys looked at more of a blend with Cabernet Franc of your Merlot?
Yeah, I'd up the Franc. I was thinking that as well. What would happen if you did that?
We haven't looked at it as a viable option, and it's largely in relation to how much Cabernet Franc we have, which is minuscule. And I just saw a comment about the movie Sideways. Yes, it's a classic. Unfortunately, it's contributed and wrongly contributed to the the perception of Merlot. So I think they've got a little bit to answer for.
It's so interesting that for a 3-minute rant, so much damage could be done to a grape varietal.
All the Merlot growers out
there.
Yeah,
it's just crazy. If it was an institution, it would have all ability to sue those movie producers. No question about it.
Love that statement that Merlot's better in a Staro Cup. I don't think anything's better in a Staro
Cup. I think to this day, the best French champagne I ever had was on St Kilda Beach at about 4 a.m. in a Staro Cup. I still remember how I tasted. It was the best ever.
How pissed were you, Rob?
Very, very badly. It was a dodgy beef kebab from one of those takeaway joints in the days when you could still buy food in the middle of the night. But yeah, I know, it was quite something. All right, guys, thank you so much. Please, I'll send our best regards to Keith and Claire. And if ever you and Kelvin decide you want to do one of those digital side-by-sides, we would be all over it. It would be absolutely fantastic. So thanks for joining us. I'll shoot a recording this out. Some people couldn't make it live tonight, but no doubt we'll be watching it online. Thanks again, and same time next year. Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, Robert, thank you very much for hosting us and for everyone coming. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelvin, too. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.